have a look at this clinical question. Now, this one, please pick two, okay? While I give you a couple of minutes to do that, just a quick read through. So we've got a couple of important things in the history, that this patient is 33. She's got asthma. And what she's presented with is that she's had frequent migraines that are causing disability. She's not able to go to work. And that's why she's requesting prophylaxis with specifically topiramate, because she's already tried amitriptyline. That's not helped. Now, topiramate is known to be teratogenic, right? And there's a recent update that as part of the discussion, if someone of childbearing age, even if they're not actively trying to get pregnant, they're of childbearing age, and 33-year-old patient is, that they need to be in a pregnancy prevention plan as part of you being able to prescribe it to them. So part of that is to be on highly effective methods of contraception. So what you're picking is two options here where on their own, they would be considered highly effective in this context. Okay. Now, for those just doing this, because the biggest proportion of people joining today were already, a lot of you were already qualified, right? This is just for your learning. But those of you that haven't done your AKT, a lot of you in ST3, you might have already done your AKT, but those that haven't done, remember, to get 1 mark in a multiple best answer like this in the AKT, you have to get both options right. You get 1 right and you get 1 wrong, you get no marks. For those of you doing it just for learning, if you get 1 right, 1 wrong, well done. You can learn about the one you didn't get, but at least you knew half of it, right? Okay. So very interesting. The 3 popular answers are E, F, and G, as I would expect, but actually quite a few people picked A and C. Okay, so A, C, quite few people picked either this or this as one of their options. Most of you picked either F or G as one of them. Some of you picked both of these. Some of you picked F and E. Some of you picked G and E. Okay, the correct answers are F and G. So as I mentioned, for those of you doing AKT in the exam, you'd need both to get the 1 mark. If you had one of them right and one wrong, there's nothing. Right? There are no half marks in the AKT. Okay, so anyone know what's the threshold of under typical use? So if you look at effectiveness of contraception, there's often tables where they look at under typical use, a real world usage, and then under ideal use, if it was used perfectly. Okay, how many patients would end up with a pregnancy despite perfect use and despite typical use? And like for example, if 1 in 100 would end up pregnant, that means it's 99% effective. If 10 in 100 would end up pregnant, that's 90% effective. Okay. Anyone know what's the threshold for something to be considered highly effective? And see, I've put this in sort of speech marks because it's actually a classification. What's considered highly effective contraception? It's got to be at least 99% effective under typical use to be considered highly effective. All right, because actually nearly everything under perfect use is highly effective. But in the real world, like for example, if someone always used condoms every time and they use them appropriately, they're very effective. But in the real world, sometimes someone will use an external lubricant and it's the wrong type and it might cause an increased risk of splitting. Okay, sometimes it's the wrong size, and again, there's a risk that increased risk of failure. Right, in real world usage. In real world usage, sometimes someone hasn't got one and it doesn't stop, and therefore that ends up with an unplanned pregnancy. All right. So both of these are more than 99% effective in typical usage. all right? And that's because these are long-term things, aren't they? All right. The progesterone-only injectable, a lot of you pick this. That's actually about 94% effective under typical usage. Under perfect usage, yeah, it's 99%, but that doesn't qualify as highly effective. This bit's important on its own. If you had this and you added to that condoms, then together, that's going to be very effective. But on its own, the progesterone-only injectable doesn't quite reach the threshold. It's better than any of these, but it's not the threshold of 99%. Okay. So let's talk about topiramate. So topiramate's teratogenic and is considered high risk in pregnancy. Generally, if there's any other option, you should go for that. But if there's no alternative, then it can be used with very strict rules. But otherwise, you should avoid it in pregnancy. So if a woman of childbearing age, there aren't other options. So if we go back to the scenario, is they've tried amitriptyline and it hadn't helped, they're still losing time from work. Why can't they have, what's the other option for migraine prophylaxis? I'm talking generally, not for this patient. What are the three options? So amitriptyline's one, topiramate's one, the other one's a beta blocker, right? We can't give this patient a beta blocker, can we? Because they're asthmatic. And so it may well make that worse. So it wouldn't really work for this patient, right? So that's why they've specifically asked for topiramate. Maybe they know someone who it helped and, you know, it's so bad. And they might not be planning a family at this stage anyway. But even despite that, because they're of childbearing age, you'd only prescribe it if there's a pregnancy prevention program in place. So what does that mean? They need to be using a form of highly effective contraception. Before they go on it, you need to do a pregnancy test to exclude that they're already pregnant. And, you know, if they were early, they might not know. And then you need to make them aware of the risks of topiramate, because if something's 99% effective, it means 1 in 100 they could still end up with a pregnancy. And topiramate can be significantly teratogenic. Okay, so there's risks to the baby. They need to be aware of that. Okay, so highly effective contraception. It means it's 99% plus effective with typical use. So there's three that fit this. The copper coil, the levonorgestrel intrauterine system, i.e. the Mirena coil, and then the progestogen-only implant. Okay, so the one you have under the skin. However, if they're on that, they need to be counseled that they mustn't take any drugs that could interact and reduce the contraceptive effectiveness, because that could bring it down under 99%. Okay, whereas, you know, the other things, you know, things like condoms, in typical usage, they're like in the 80% up to low 90s, depending which study you look at. Okay, things like the combined contraceptive pill, it's sort of just above 90%. You know, progesterone only pill, similarly. The progesterone injections, sort of 94% or thereabouts. Okay, if you look at the UK MEC sort of leaflet on that, right? These three are all 99% plus on typical usage. Hope you found that helpful. Please do subscribe to the channel, like and share with your colleagues if you'd like more content.